Hey everybody, it's your pal Mike Shea from Flourish here with the DM's Deep Dive. This is a completely irregular show done whenever myself and a guest can get together and talk about a particular topic of D&D and dive deep into it. And today, the topic of conversation is something that is completely non-controversial, and I don't think anybody has real strong opinions on it, but I thought I'd bring it up anyway, which is skill challenges. We're going to talk about skill challenges today. I wanted to bring Teos in on this conversation because I know Teos has thoughts about skill challenges. We've talked about it a lot. He has experience building skill challenges. He's worked with them a lot, as have I. And I thought it'd be a fun time for the two of us to get together and talk specifically about this conversation. Teos, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hello, everybody. Mike, thanks for having me on.
Always a pleasure. My pleasure's all mine.
Qualified by being super opinionated about skill challenges.
I don't. My wife. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's not going to be the last time. So, I was talking about this with Michelle, my wife, and she said, "What is Teos's opinion on skill challenges?" And I said, "I don't know. I'm not sure. Like, we're going to find out, right?" So I'm excited.
Spoiler: it's a bit of everything. But so I'm Teos Abadia. I have worked on a number of things for Dungeons and Dragons, probably culminating in the Acquisitions Incorporated hardback book, which you should all have and read. And I'm very proud of it. Worked on a lot of convention events for 5e and D&D Next. I worked with you on the super awesome Vault of the Dracolich, and with Scott Fitzgerald Gray, Dream Team.
Yeah.
Best project ever. And then I recently have been working a lot for Dwarven Forge. I worked in board games. For Hero Quest. That was awesome. And then I'm about to, hopefully, in probably a month, launch a Kickstarter with an adventure I wrote with my son, which is pretty cool.
Awesome. That is awesome. Okay, I'll be back in it. I'm excited. So skill challenges are something that has kind of come back, I'd say, right? Like they were part of 4E. And then they kind of, along with much of 4E, sort of disappeared. And then we were all kind of into 5E and we're doing 5E stuff. And I'd say probably within the last few months, I saw a lot more sort of, hey, there was good things about 4E that got thrown out with the bathwater. And we should really, think about some of them. And one of the ones that came back and has come up in conversation are skill challenges. People refer to, skill challenges were great. And I guess I won't get right into my opinion on the matter. But before we get too far, I'd like to talk about what a skill challenge is. And I think there's two sides to this. One is...
Can I even take us back?
Yeah. So, well, let me give me 1 second. Okay. We'll see, because I think it's going to go for it. So one is, what was it in 4th edition? Right? And 2 is, what do we mean by it now? And I think they're separate things. But please, take us back.
Well, I even want to say, what was it even before that? Sure. And why did we even end up with skill challenges, right? Because before 3rd edition, we really basically didn't have skills, right? And so what would happen is the designer or the DM would just cook up some wild situation and we would have to think our way out of it. And it was often really arbitrary. You can almost characterize this like arbitrary. And did I just go black?
I just screwed everything up.
Oh, it's okay.
I moved a window and it just blew everything up. There we go. It's almost there. Perfect. Sorry about that.
So back then it would be, this is a world when backstabbing, sneak attacking required to spend 3 rounds getting behind the monster, right? So figuring out any situation could often involve, I want to feel the tunnel. Is it smooth? Oh, maybe a purple worm came here. The other one, it's rough. Maybe an umber hulk. Oh, well, the other one has to be safe. That was sort of your skill challenge, but it could be really arbitrary, right? The treasure could be hidden inside a pillow or just the weirdest stuff. And so we just sort of messed around in the environment. And that was because it was so arbitrary. With a bad dungeon master, it was atrocious, right? It was just so bad. And even Gary Gygax's stuff could be painful at times. And check out the garbage chute in the fire layer. And
you didn't say you checked behind the upper ring of the curtain.
Right. You didn't say you looked up.
Turns out there's a purple worm up there.
Right. Yeah. So there was this desire not only to give you skills, which other games were doing, but to a little bit more codify the experience and have a more cohesive and fair experience that you could participate in around that. And so in 3rd edition, you had skills, but you also had this storytelling application and encounters where you were doing things. Unfortunately, because of the nature of situations, they really ended up being two things that you do. One is like a magic puzzle, right? Arcane runes on a door.
Right.
And the other one was diplomatize the noble.
Right.
Right. And this usually involved a bunch of checks because it's a complicated thing.
Right.
And one character would do it, though guess what? The best one at the skills, which was for the arcane door was going to be your bard or your wizard. And for the diplomacy was like your cleric or your sorcerer, right?
Right. Right.
And that was a skill challenge back then. And it was horrible because it was everybody just sat and it was like watching a Decker in Shadowrun, right? It was just like, great.
Yeah.
We're having fun.
Yeah.
So fourth edition was this idea, right? Of like, what if everybody's involved? It's still a level playing field, but everybody's involved. There's this sort of complexity to it around this scene. There are a bunch of checks that we're all going to try, and we're all going to try to do these things. And we'll use skills to triumph through the scene, right? I don't know if that helps.
Yeah. So what do you, when people talk about them today, what do you think they mean? Are they talking about, and I know we're like grouping a lot of people in the one big pile, right?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, what do you think people are talking about when they say, boy, I miss skill challenges? Do you think they're talking about how they worked in 4E?
No, because I mean they were dismal in 4E in a lot of ways. Like I mean, in fact, it's sort of funny to hear the rose-eyed glasses come out now because in a lot of ways that was it had great potential, but it was often really flawed at the table.
Didn't turn out to play out that way, right?
No, you know, but I think it was the fact that we do hunger for these scenes that involve skills, involve interacting with the environment, with the situation. As the primary determinant of that action and storytelling, right? We want to traverse the wilderness and have that feel real and like we're all doing our part. We want to, you know, and it can be a simple thing like get across the canyon or navigate the darkness or figure out what happened in the crime scene. And these kinds of things are cool when we all use our skills and there's some sort of structure to it and we feel like it's engaging, right? So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I think you're exactly right. I think that people are looking back on them, and they're in my opinion, they're forgetting what they were defined as in 4E, and they have maybe things that they're doing today, which they call skill challenges, that aren't really like the 4E skill challenges, and probably are working just fine for them, and that's great, right? Like, hey, we 5E in a lot of ways, we all have to sort of reach out and invent our own stuff because it's not there.
Yeah.
And if they've got something and it works, it's great. And I know there's like a million YouTube videos about different options for skill challenges. So recognizing that we have this like heavily structured spreadsheet style skill challenge from 4E where it's like, this is what you need to accomplish. This is how many successes you have to get. This is how many failures you have to get. These are the skills that you can use. Go, right? Which was very rigid, and in my opinion, fell apart the minute a player got involved. Right? They're like, I don't want to do that stuff. I'm not riding a raft down the thing. I'm flying. Right?
Right.
I'm gonna go walk on the side. Oh, you can't walk on the side. Why not? Right? Well, it's a big cliff. I'll go on top of the cliff. No, there's dragons up there. Right? You got to get on the raft. Roll your freaking athletics check. Right? So, the minute they broke apart, and so I think people are starting to come up with their own. So looking at where DMs are today and looking at the kind of D&D we have today and how D&D has evolved, what 3 tips would you offer a modern day dungeon master, a 5th edition dungeon master, when they're running complicated situations that typically skill challenges addressed?
So I would say the first thing is you want to focus on the scene or scenes and the story of it. Less on the skills. So one of the real problems with 4E was that it would often look at the list of skills and it would prescribe to you a result, which is what you're talking about, right? That whole thing where you're like, you want to describe what you're doing, but the module, the adventure literally says, you push through the barrier and to the other side when you had a totally different idea, right? So don't that's not the point of these things. The point of it is the story and the scenes and how that's going to tell a story over time. I would say my second would be allow good results to provide advantages and move the scene forward, and then failures are going to be setbacks to that what your goal is, and complications that have a story and goal impact that is going to be enjoyable at the table. And it's not that 4 successes before 3 failures type approach of 4E. It's not some mathematical equation. It's you telling a story with your table. Let that play out the way it should based on what happened and what was failed or succeeded at, right?
Mm-hmm. And do you have a third?
Sure. The whole thing should feel organic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it should not feel like a board game. That can be fun for some groups, just like puzzles can feel good when they feel that way. But I would say in general, it shouldn't feel like, okay, now everybody give me, your blot check, or, what's your best skill? Look it up. And, ideally it feels like a scene in a movie or a novel where we're resolving these situations, and it's cool, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out, where do you think how do we talk Rohan into helping us,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's
Mm-hmm.
that sort of situation, and it should play out that way with hopefully cool, dynamic role playing and clutch roles and everybody excited and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think you stole all 3 of my top tips that I was going to give, and you nailed them. This is going to be boring. I thought we're going to argue about the ladders that where the DCs change depending on the level of the person that's climbing it. That's what we're going to.
I mean, that was a big part of skill challenges.
No kidding, right? Like, it's an epic ladder.
That's what people love the most about skill challenges. With the DCs were calibrated to your party, so it was always a really cool challenge.
Why? Yeah. Why have bonuses? So
because the world is defined by you, Mike, not by some other person at another table playing an entirely different level. It's your story.
The whole world shifts and changes. The ladder gets creakier, and the rungs start to break, and I'm like, why? I got good at this. Yeah. So I think offering my thoughts on it, I agree completely that if somebody wants to have a system, if they want to have a framework that helps them with this, spend that time thinking about what the actual situation is in the world more than the mechanics that you're going to wrap around it. Right. So really, like, if you think about like a court scene, the whole diplomatize the noble. Right. Well, really think about that noble. Think about the noble's advisors. Think about the people that are against them. Make it like Elizabeth. Right. Make it like Queen Elizabeth's court. Right. With all these intrigues and all these people that are going against her and all these people and think that through. Don't think about DCs. Don't think about skills. Don't think about think about how that works without relation to the characters. Right? Think about how it actually works. If you have a bunch of cultists committing sacrifices to summon a demon, think about what the things are in the world that's causing that, right?
Yeah.
And then, like you said, go towards what choices the characters make, i.e. what choices the players are making, and then think about how that works. And then we go to our core mechanic, right? We fall back to the core mechanic of D&D, which is DM describes the situation, player describes what they want to do, DM arbitrates the situation, right? And that middle part, we don't know what that's going to be, right? We don't know what that is. So better to know, if you want to prepare, because I think we get very nervous when we don't have a framework in front of us, right? We're like, I don't know, how am I going to do that, right? And if we take that nervousness and that energy and put it in towards understanding the world, what's happening in the world, then it's easier to improvise. We know how they're going to, how is the king's advisor going to react to being insulted, or we can work with that. And then, on that idea of failing forward and success, success with complications, right? It isn't a binary success-fail mechanic. And I think that's what they tried to do. They tried to capture that in 4E with the so many successes before so many failures to kind of codify this. One check isn't going to break it.
And it's worth.
But the problem is why is it 3, right? Like, well, how come every skill challenge, no matter how complicated, always fails with 3 fails? And it's like, why? Like, that doesn't make any sense, not in the world.
Well, and it didn't before. That's the errata version, right? I mean, one of the things that's worth noting is 4th edition launched with the DMG having these skill challenges in there, but they hadn't been part of the play testing.
Yeah.
Not that there was a lot of play testing for 4E, but it was this thing that got thrown in there, and originally was like a totally different amount of failures for each level of complexity. And the complexity is supposed to sort of determine how meaty a challenge it is. And the idea with a 5 complexity, which is 12 successes and 3 failures, originally was a much higher number, which is a huge amount of rolls, right? That was supposed to be like a combat, XP wise.
Right.
And it's just, and the reality is it didn't work at all as printed. And if you look at the errata document, it's like replace paragraph 3 with this, replace paragraph 7 with this,
Yeah.
replace paragraph.
Oh,
It's just,
yeah.
I mean, it's
Enrique. I had Enrique Bertrand on the show. I don't know if you saw that one. We're talking about 4E
I'm sure it is.
overall, and we were just
Yeah,
laughing at like the 197 page errata or whatever it was. And,
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
so I think your 3 tips are absolutely, they're as far as I'm concerned. I don't know what anybody else thinks, but I think your tips are great. So
Same.
When we look back at what skill challenges, we've already talked a lot about it, but I guess I'm particularly interested in like what were the aspects that skill challenges that worked in 4E with skill challenges. Like what I think we kind of know. Well, let me start by, so we can get out of the way and get it, at least for me, it's like therapy, to talk about what clearly in my mind didn't work. And we've talked a bit about it, which is the structure is too rigid, right? The structure is brittle. And when it's arbitrary, right? In a lot of cases, you'd have these 5 successes before 3 failures. They're completely arbitrary. And you were trying to define what the skills would be that somebody would use when there are spells that can take place, or there are things they should just be able to do given the circumstance in the world without having to roll a check. And yet we're trying to shoehorn them back into rolling a check because that's what our spreadsheet tells us we need to do. Right. And that rigidity, I mean, like I tried, the thing that kind of bugs me, and like when I get in arguments with people about it on Twitter, because what else are you going to do on Twitter? And is that, or maybe I'm just having the arguments in my head because I don't actually post, but I read somebody's tweet and then I have an argument in my head, which is far more effective than actually posting anything to Twitter, as far as I can tell. And the argument that I have in my head is like, I've spent a lot of time working with skill challenges, right? I have like 5 Sly Flourish articles, and you can read me going like crazier and crazier if you read through these until at the end I'm like, just stop trying, right? I was like, and I think I came up with this idea of like dynamic skill challenges, which are a series of skill checks, right? Like, and so the 4E style didn't work for me, but parts of it, obviously there's a need there and people are interested in it. So what are the aspects of the 4th edition skill challenge that worked and that we can bring forward, would you say?
So I think of 2 things when I think about skill challenges that worked. One was my first Gen Con after 4E had launched. We played a game there and had this fantastic experience in this tavern dealing with all these different individuals. And at the end of it, one of my friends goes, "Was that a skill challenge?" And the DM's like, "Yeah, I just smoothed it over." And later I looked at the adventure, and I mean, smoothing it over is like
an understatement.
An understatement, tremendous understatement. He had done what it should have been, right? Which is to make it feel like an organic, story-driven, responsive to what we're coming up with kind of thing, and used it all as just a framework and a guide, which is what most of things kind of are and should be, right? To be successful, they should adapt to the players and work around them. And in the end, I mean, the truth is it felt like what it should have felt like. It felt like we were talking to people and learning information and progressing towards our goal, right? So that was, just early on, I knew from my first 4E Gen Con, these things can work. It's a matter of figuring out how. And as I saw really bad ones, then I could just check off my list. Not like this, right? And then I'd see good ones and go, okay, more like that, And so we, I've written a lot of them. And to me, what works is focusing on that scene, right? Where you look at, like we did one for Ashes of Athos that had you had to find a way into the ziggurat of Tyr, right? And so what it does is it has a series of steps, and there are possible things you can do. Like one is, well, you've got to find somebody that knows about this. So how do you go about finding someone who might give you this? And so like one of the options is you could talk to somebody who is a Templar with the defense kind of group, the defense ministry. And that has its own dangers, as you might expect, of trying to deal with a Templar and negotiate. So if you go that route, it can, unfold in certain ways, different checks, different kinds of interactions, and that can play out, but it could even turn against you, right? Because they might raise the alarm that you're going to break in, or do both, tell you where it is, but also raise the alarm. And same thing with like people who are ex-gladiators might tell you different information. So there was this way to like filter through the scenes while making skill checks so that it felt ideally organic and good. And when you'd see this play out at the table, running it time and time again, you can assess whether it works or not, right? And that's why I like organized play so much. Is you see just table after table the thing that you created play out, and you go, okay, this was pretty good. This fit the bill, and the DMs know what they're doing, right? So because it's always two things: you've got to communicate to the DM how this thing should play out, and you have to have it work for the players at the table as an experience.
Yeah. So one of the thoughts. So I guess there's two topics I want to talk about, and I guess I can write them down. I have a notepad right here, but I'll mention them as well. I want to talk about the idea of doom clocks. I forget what they're called in Blades in the Dark. Blades in the Dark has a name for these things. Somebody please remind me. It's something clock, but I think like the idea of like the Armageddon clock from the Powered by the Apocalypse games, and Blades I know came from that. But there's another name that Blades uses for it. I want to talk about that. But the other thing that occurred to me is I think I have this right. Weren't you one of the 3 authors of the Gangs of Waterdeep big epic, or is that somebody else?
Someone else did that.
Man.
That was Sean.
I know Sean and James.
And Will.
Oh, Will Doyle. That's right. Did you get a chance to play it? Yeah. We played at the same table together.
I played it with this guy called Mike Shea.
Yeah, he was a loser, right? I think he was the one that blew it, right? Because he attacked the drow when no one should attack the drow.
I think you kissed someone in a carriage, so that's a win.
Yeah, I did. I used my knock rod. And what occurs to me is like you can almost think of that. That was probably one of the most fun D&D games I've ever played in, right? It was just outstanding. Your friend Paul doing the fan dance around the table just made, I'll never forget that. And what the interesting thing about that is it was like 8 hours long, right? Wasn't it a 9 hour long with a break or something like that, or 10 hours with a break?
So.
And we fought one dude, and it was a mistake, right? Like we fought a dude and we really shouldn't have. And all the rest of it was sort of navigating these complicated situations that were mixtures of diplomacy and persuasion and all the different. There wasn't just a bunch of skill checks; it was doing a bunch of stuff. And you could think like that was a tremendous, skill challengey sort of game.
Yeah.
But it did have this very organic feel. I never felt like I was stuck in a framework. I never felt like, I never felt like we weren't allowed to do something. And the interesting thing is our dungeon master who ran that for us, I think had only been playing D&D for like 9 months, right? She was
something like that. Yeah, she was pretty new, and if it was like her second con, something like that.
Yeah, and she was tremendous, right? Like it was just, and that so that speaks to obviously how well they wrote that, and then lots of smart things they did with it, like making sure that all the characters were rogues. Right, I think there was like 5 rogues and a bard or something. That was like the character breakdown. Yeah. So we knew, we knew what we were going to be doing. But if you think about that as like a giant skill challenge, that was one that I think worked out really well. It offered up a lot of options, for freedom, but also for these big complicated situations. So yeah, a couple people in chat are saying they're called progress clocks or danger clocks. And it was something that I had investigated, unfortunately, after I did a video where I talked about this stuff. After you do a video is the time to then do the research and realize how wrong you were. And one of the things that I like about this idea of progress clocks is like they're almost like skill challenges, but they're like the smallest piece of a skill challenge. They are like, you essentially draw a circle and you divide it into some number of pie pieces, and the more pie pieces, the more complicated, or the more it's not necessarily complications, it's the number of potential failures or successes you need. And you could have multiple clocks. So you could have a clock that's the guards are onto you, and after all of this fills up, they're going to capture you. And on this other side is you need to find all of the information. There are 4 pieces, and the clock pieces are 4. And I thought that was it's only like if you I think there's a Blades in the Dark. I think it's Creative Commons, so I think you can actually go look at the text on the web.
I haven't owned it, but I haven't. I gotta be honest, I haven't read it.
Yeah, well, I have it. Yeah, so I have a physical copy upstairs, and I read this part. I've looked at a lot of it, but I've read this part. I've never played Blades. I'd really love to. I'd really love to play Blades. So Evil John posted the link to progress clocks in the Twitch chat. So what's neat about, so he has all the, it describes this whole thing. I think it's Jonathan Harper who made Blades in the Dark? I think I have that right. I don't know. That's off the top of my head. So hopefully I'm right. And it's a really simple way of like handling John Harper. Excellent. So it's a really easy way to handle complex situations with just a tiny tool, which is essentially like checkboxes, right? Or like tick marks. You know, it doesn't have to be a circle with lines through it. That's really nice. Right, sure. It could just be tracking successes and failures. But you can track, you can assign the number of successes and failures to the things that are in the world, right? And you could say like, in order to stop the ritual, there are 4 things they have to do. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Bang, 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 bang. And then when they complete 4, they've done it. And failure will be if this thing happens 5 times. 1, 2, 3.
Totally.
And they're wrapped around the things that happen, that happen in the world. And I think
because like that was a thing that skill challenges really had as a problem, right? In that they often, when you failed, it was like you got the equivalent of exhaustion, right? You lost healing surges. Right. And even in 5th edition, you see people who are mimicking skill challenges, but they'll just toss exhaustion onto it because a common thing is going through the wilderness, right? That's an obvious skill challenge thing. Yep. So then we'll take a thing of exhaustion. Oh, and then later there's a monster that gives you exhaustion. Oh, and then soon you're carrying some of the characters around.
And they would rather be dead, right? Like two levels of exhaustion. I'm just going to go hang myself.
Right. I have opinions about exhaustion, but and that's the problem is you want to think about what are these failures and conditions. So one way is sort of like we're talking about before, right? Which is that it's just natural progress and setbacks, right? If you're trying to negotiate with a Templar to learn how to get into the arena of Tyr, which is a not okay to go to area, you must do well enough that they're not going to sell you off, because if they sell you off, that's going to have a negative, or they might even tell you the wrong way or the trap filled way, right? You will die and I will report you. Yeah. Perfect. Win-win, right? Yeah. So those and that result isn't necessarily known to you. Feel like you did a poor job, but they told you how to get in. Okay. How bad could that be? Right. And so now we've got the makings of a story, right? And that feels good and real. Or we could do something like a clock-like system or something like that, right? We know that there's you're trying to elude the gang that's hunting you down through the streets, and you're taking all these actions, but at some point they'll get there, right? Or you must find the ritual site before the ritual goes off so that you can get into the dungeon and have that last scene be stopping the ritual, right? Yeah, you gotta get in there with enough time. Right. Those are all great devices, and you don't necessarily need any one approach to it. That's what I think was so bad about that 3 failures. This idea that 3 failures was always the number. Like, oh, no, I don't know where that came from.
So arbitrary. I think Evil John in chat said like no one could take 4. like you just rage quit. Like I'm done with D&D.
Yeah. Well, it was all too long, and that idea that complexity. Everybody, after a while, you never found a skill challenge that was really more than complexity 1.
No, because everything else was tremendously boring. Yeah.
Right, without having arbitrary rules that changed it, which is what a lot of good skill challenges were. Is they changed that focus, because otherwise it was terribly boring.
Yeah, well, and that the same problem of rigidity. The longer it was, the more likely players are going to come up with ideas that are going to wreck whatever the framework was. A small skill challenge like a 3 by 3. Right out. What's that? 5 is right out. Exactly. Yeah. A 3 by 3 is really just like a big skill check, right? It's not, like I'm sure we've done it in 5e and never even thought about it, right? Like, if you think about the process of getting, we talked about the old Gygax style of getting through the door, that process is like a small skill challenge, right? That the process is like, well, is it trapped? I don't know. Do a perception check. Okay, I roll a perception check. Oh, I rolled a 3. Well, my passive is 14, so does that mean anything? And then you're like, no, it needed a 15, right? And so it's a perception check to discover if it's trapped or not. Yeah. It's a investigation check to figure out how it's trapped and how you're going to muck with it. It's perhaps a thieves' tools or sleight of hand check or something else, or maybe it's an arcana check if it's magical, to try to disarm the check. And then it's like, well, now it's locked. So now I got to roll a thieves' tool check to unlock it, or screw this, I'm tired. I know it's not trapped. I'm just going to kick in the door, right? And then, that's an athletics check. So you have, it's like, and nobody, God help you if anybody's running doors like that, or you go to the Mike Shea, like after a thorough investigation, you recognize it is neither trapped nor locked. Just get through the door. There is a fireball, a slow fireball coming up behind you, though. So you're going to want to get through that room.
Yeah. And if you're going to make a door that complicated, then you need to think through what the fun is, right? And that's part of the skill challenge, too. There were some times that there would be skill challenges. This is true in 5th edition, too, where you find this skill challenge framework that is not worth experiencing.
Yeah, right.
Like it's not interesting. And there was a 4th edition adventure, and I like the author a lot, and I liked most of this adventure a lot. But in it, you were going through a sort of frozen area, sort of, I don't know, oral infused kind of coldness type thing. I don't know that it was actually oral, but something, sort of like a evil entity infused. And as you're pressing through, it was like, how do you press through, right? So the fighter just goes like, well, I have a huge gun, so I just take it. And then the adventurer would tell you, I don't know, murder seal pups and wrap your skin in them. And it was just funny to like
kill and open up a tauntaun. Yeah.
Right. And then you work through, and then someone else would be like, well, I just jump over the snow drifts with like athletics. And you're like, I don't even know that there are snow drifts. Sure. Okay. And it was just, but then the text would say like, you jump over an icy pond, avoiding it. And you're like, none of this feels like it's real. It's like a weird choose your own adventure board game thing.
Right.
And that's the thing is
there's nothing worse than text in the adventure telling you how your character accomplished something. Right. You're like, why am I playing? You already figured this out.
And without individual context, because the idea is just like, well, I have to traverse this land, but I don't even know what the challenge really is.
Right.
And now you're just making me roll, and then you're going to tell me about the challenges after the roll, and also, by the way, how I superseded them. It's a disconnect, right? And whereas it would be more interesting if you say you're going, scene 1 of the skill challenge is you hit this area that has steep sides, and there are these icy areas, but the ice looks really thin. What do you do? And now we're like, oh yeah, what do we do? I don't know. Can I see if some of them are thinner than others? Hey, I'm the ranger. Maybe I can make like some sort of nature check to figure out, stuff. And I can look for tracks. You start coming up with some ideas, and now everybody's a little more involved because the scene has character, and we can describe it based on that too. You succeed at the nature check. You find that, most of them should be pretty frozen, but some of them are not going to be. And it can, you think there's some geothermal vents under here. So it's not just, they're not uniform. Oh, okay. Cool. And you found some tracks, and so now we're on to it, and we get through that scene, and that can be kind of part 1, and we can get to part 2, and it can be something else interesting, like there's this ice bridge that goes across. Well, how do you want to handle that?
Right.
And an important part is always to come up with what should be automatic success, right? Like if I just cast Mass Fly, we all cross, right? Or I have some arcane gate type spell. Well, we all get across. Or maybe I come up with a really clever idea involving ropes and a summoned monster and who knows what else, right? And so
cats. Come
Tentacle.
On, cat. Sorry.
Mike Shea has tentacles confirmed.
Yep. That's my Evard Black Tentacle. So I want to talk about beats, skill challenges and beats in a second here. But also, if you are here on Twitch, there's a bunch of you here. If you have any questions, any topics, any thoughts that you want to share, please feel free to throw them in chat. Teos and I will be happy to talk about any and all topics, reasonable topics. So please tell us how you feel about it. Where have you used skill challenges and they've worked for you? How have you changed how skill challenges were done back in 4E? What are your thoughts about them now? Where do you get stuck? All those kinds of things. We want to hear about it all. And please put it in there, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, it's funny that you talk about like, going through the wilderness or going through the frozen tundra, and like, how do you survive, and all these things. And I think part of the way that skill challenges end up getting boring or not really interesting is because nothing good happens from them. Right. It's all just endurance. Or not always, but like, a lot, like you're not going to get a gold out of it. Yeah. I mean, it could depend, but a lot of them were like traveling through, we got to do something while you're traveling through the jungle. And you're like, well, I'm only either going to get throat leeches or not. Right. And like, I'd rather not have throat leeches. So, can't we just montage this? Do we have to like roll throat leech checks?
And the thing with the montage can be great, right?
Sure.
But I've played with Keith Baker, and he's great at those scenes, but you have to want that. Like, you have to want you have made it through 3 days of the wilderness. Tell me, Mike, how did you, what was a cool moment you had, right? that can be great, but not everybody loves that. And it can be sort of surprising people sometimes to hear that. And maybe it's very obvious to others, but it's true. Like some players just go like, what do you mean? I'm just going to tell you what happened? Like, I don't want that. You tell me what the situation was, or give me, it's sort of like when you ask people to world build, sometimes they love it and sometimes they don't. They want to really feel that the DM creates the world, and then they overcome it in the moment, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, when running scenes like that, if you are going to have, like, I've done it. I'm running Rime of the Frost Maiden now, and I'll have it that if they're going across, like, they're not traveling on the road, I kind of go back to the style that I was using when I was running Tomb of Annihilation, which is, who are your trackers? Like, who is it that's setting a path, so that you're not going to get lost in the frozen north, and who's keeping an eye out for any nasty monsters or anything that's on you, and who's doing something else. Sometimes it's provisioning. If it's more than a couple days, it's like, who's making sure everybody's staying hydrated? Who's making sure everybody's staying warm? Who's making sure that the food isn't spoiling? Who's making sure of all this stuff? And then, in some cases they say like, well, my ranger has favored terrain, I'm not going to lose path. And you're like, great, you're the pathfinder, and you automatically succeed. We don't even worry about rolling, And then, the guy, well, I have a 26 passive perception, so I'm going to be the guy in the watch. And you're like, man, they keep rolling 27s, right? So, you can kind of work with that. And, and it's interesting when people use, and I think this is true for skill challenges overall, it's what frustrated us in 4E. And I think it's something that many of us, I know I do, and I'm pretty sure you do, embrace, is when people will use like spells or other abilities or other circumstances or bits of their background or other bits of history to overcome an obstacle. And you don't have to roll a check to do it, right? And sometimes we're like, I feel like a check is in order, but you're like, no, they have it, right? Like they this part of their character they built. Why wouldn't we automatically give them the reward for this? It doesn't hurt anything.
Back in relatively early 4E, Arcane Gate was one of those spells that you could take, right? That's sort of like a dimension door, like get to or Arcane Bridge. I think it was Arcane Bridge, wasn't it?
I don't remember.
I don't know. Maybe
Arcane Gate sounds right.
Arcane Gate sounds right. So there was this scene where you're in this temple and all these Yuan Ti come out, and you need to get to, at the far end, you see this body, which is the body of the explorer trying to recover their pack. And this stone door starts closing off, blocking off that body, right? And this player, this is the first time it happened, but it happened after that, where they use Arcane Gate. Right. Because people started swapping it for other stuff, right? That was more powery, more damagey, right? But some people would have it. And the player would inevitably use something like this and go, I can get right there. And and I would just go like, oh, good call. But I'm thinking to myself, that's why I put this there. I put this for you to do that. Like,
right.
This is that's my gift to you. Enjoy it. Yeah, you're supposed to look totally cool right now.
You didn't sit back and be like, I'll allow it. Right?
No, and that's the thing, right? Is like, that's what's important about those situations is there are going to be some times when the players just use that cool feature, and that's the whole point. Like, that's great when every now and then something's just going to be blown away by that class feature. And we see this, and you can look at a lot of these Tasha's designs that they'll have some of these features that don't come up very often, and they're relatively high levels, and you're like, man, there better be some payoff. I forget what the feature was, but Sean and I on our podcast were reviewing one of them recently that was a level 14 feature. And I'm thinking to myself, you might play 3 campaigns or more and never have this feature come up.
Right.
So if you're a DM, you need to come up with some way that this feature
I've definitely embraced the lazy side of that, which is like, I'll pay a lot of attention to the circumstances that are happening. And I'll certainly default to like saying yes when they have a feature like that that has any relevance to the situation. I'll be pleasantly surprised and work with them to make that happen. But it's rare for me to like understand the features that a character has and then build circumstances to reinforce those features. It's cool, and I'm sure the people that do it, I'm sure there's a lot of good payoff for that. I'm just too lazy to do it.
Yeah,
right? There's like 6 characters. There's a lot of features. And like, I've got a game to run.
Often what I'll do, so one thing is I tend to not let characters level often, which is a little bit of a sore subject sometimes with my players. But what it allows me to do is when they do level,
you can really pay attention.
If we're all like in D&D Beyond, it's not a big deal to go in and look and see what are the new things they got.
Yeah.
Right.
Or have them talk about
now
it.
they can do this all the time. All right, well, I'll be a little more prepared for that. And often it's about that cheese factor to just know it and know that it's coming. And
Right.
okay, but sometimes it's that they have that wacky thing. I can talk to the spirits. Well, okay, that's a thing I can play with in this campaign, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm looking through.
They're super thematic.
Yeah, looking through some of the chats. So Gallandrill says that they've used skill challenges for stopping a ritual, surviving a night against a zombie horde, and trying to find a teenage werewolf before he transforms. I think that in James Intercasso's adventure, it's one of the I'm not going to remember the name. It's the Eberron adventure, where the dead wait.
Oh. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, and it's sort of a zombie apocalypse kind of adventure where you have
Third Oracle War adventure. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And you have to sort of survive the night getting attacked by, the undead hordes of the mist of the whatever the death mist is. The Mournland. Yeah, the Mournland mist. And that's one that has like a lot of different skill checky sort of things, and there's a fair bit of combat, right? You're guarding the door and kicking people in the face, but there's a lot of like investigating the house and finding stuff in the cellars and working with all these strange things, and that's another one where it's like you say, I haven't read it, right? I played in it, but I didn't read it.
I've run it too, so yeah.
Yeah, and so I imagine the way it's written has lots of like these are all the different things that can happen here, and here's how you can interact with it. Here's how the characters can interact with it.
It's complex. I was sort of impressed at how complex it is, but I think it's the complexity I love and aspire to, that communicates to the DM, play with this, right? Like, I'm giving you this. This is the framework as intended. You get the point of this. Do what you need to adjust it. And clearly, when Graham ran it for us, he adjusted it on the fly. And I did the same thing with my table. Sort of, how long should it be? When should those reinforcements arrive? When should the phase kick in? You can play with that a bit because you get it. You get that the structure there is really neat, and there are all kinds of cool ideas and neat checks to do about the history of the place and what's downstairs and all that. And so, yeah, it's great stuff. I love it. You know what I also thought about when you were saying earlier about sort of traversing over an extended period of time? There's a little bit of that in Horde of the Dragon Queen, when you're in the caravan for that extended period of time. That's a case where you've got a number of different checks that take place as you're trying to sort of act like you are the people you are and learn things and figure out what to do, and different things are coming in. That's sort of skill challenge-ish in some ways. It has some of those aspects. Yeah,
let's see. Some other folks use skill challenges for a minecart chase, escape from escape. It says and escape from a published adventure. I presume they mean there was a minecart chase and escape in a published adventure, not actual escaping from a published adventure. That's pretty meta. I had a friend of mine sharing a tale.
Cartoon story.
Yeah, a friend of mine is running a very high level 5th edition game. This doesn't count as me talking about my game because it's actually another guy's game. And he was telling me that like they're in hell, I think, or some version of hell, and they face Charon, the boatman, who says like, I will give you back this thing, but you have to play this game. And he sat them all around a table and gave them character sheets, and they're playing Hidden Shrine of Tomoe-chan. And I was like, he's like, do you think that's a cool idea? And I'm like, I don't know. It sounds pretty great. I'm like, only if he's a dick DM though. Like, he should have a lot of house rules. He should he should be all of the things you try not to be. And now you have to role play him. And he said like Charon was getting really upset about metagaming, which I thought was just outstanding, right? Like the characters are metagaming in so. Yeah.
Oh, man.
So that you can only do
that's
that.
a great idea.
That's like going once in a lifetime. You're not getting away with that.
The DM is role playing being another DM.
Right.
That's Inception. It's like
right. It was like Inception, and all the players like you just don't want us to play our 18th level characters, do you? You want 5th level characters. Yeah. So I thought that was pretty funny.
It's like in Tomb of Annihilation, we had a B team of their hirelings that they started to play, and they're like, "Is this an excuse for you to not level our characters?" I'm like, "A little bit."
Yeah.
You can level.
I'm not saying that's true, but boy, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier when you're 4th level. So yeah, Zelspell says keep it tight and the results and keep it tight and results set up encounter after chase, which I presume is like, there's something about keeping the end close to the beginning in a skill challenge, right? Mm-hmm. That like if you're gonna have this sort of framework, you don't want a big long thing. Like the further out you get, the wider the variance on how it's going to play out. If it's a fixed thing, you kind of know how it's going to work.
Well, you want to know your goal, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that goal shouldn't get lost. And that's true of any encounter, any adventure. We see that in Rime of the Frost Maiden, right? Where what's our goal? Mm-hmm. At the beginning, you're pretty sure when you bought the book that the goal was ending the rhyme. But it's not the goal at the beginning. It's kind of the goal in the middle, but then it's not. And right. And that's one of those things where what is the goal? Like when the goal moves or isn't defined, then we can lose ourselves. Right. And a skill challenge, know what the goal is. And it can be traverse the wilderness or whatever. And then we can have really wide experiences because we know what we're doing is we're traversing this wilderness, right? Or we're finding the secret door. We're negotiating with the noble for passage. And when you get that thing going, you got it, right?
Yeah, and I really think that like paying particular attention to the good things that can happen, right? What benefit will they gain? Is there a way that if they traverse it really well, they gain something from it? This sort of like if you go to an unhallowed ground, an unholy ground where dark cultists have been twisting the land and there's a huge monument, and you do this check, maybe you don't just hallow it. Maybe that a divine being that was trapped there gives you a bless that lasts for the whole day, and all of your characters get it, right? And then they're like, wow, I'm better than I was, right? Like I left this skill challenge and I actually gained something.
Along those lines, I'm trying to remember, I think in something I wrote for MCDM, they may have actually asked me to do a sort of skill challenge type thing, but I could be inventing.
So I know Matt Colville. I think I probably watched it a while ago. I know skill challenges are something that he's talked about, and I think he talked about them fondly. I think he liked having a framework for that kind of thing.
Yeah,
but I'm not sure what his approach was.
So when everybody gets their Kingdoms in Warfare, which you should get because I've seen it. I'm one of those fortunate few who's seen it, and it is really good. And I'm the kind of person to poo-poo that sort of stuff. Like, oh, mass. You know how I feel about mass combat. Like, maybe we should just do missions.
Right.
And so seeing a system that actually, like, I would use, like, this is cool, and that's what this is in this book, amongst many other things. But I got to write the adventure for it, and it has some scenes in there that you would say are skill challenge-ish.
Cool. I didn't know you had an adventure in.
Yeah, so I wrote the adventure for it, which is super fun to do because I got to look at the system.
Yeah.
And think about how do I write an adventure that lets you use that system, right? So that you and showcases it, which is kind of what I did for Acquisitions Incorporated, right? How do we write these rules for things like franchises? The idea that you are part of this larger entity, and then have an adventure that literally shows the DM, here's how you can have your organization grow over time, and here's how you can use the downtime, right? Every single chapter has downtime in it and organization growth, and so it's part of the framework. So I took that side of approach to sort of say, like, all right, we want to sell people on these rules. Like, you bought this book, you want the adventure to
show you how they work.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I've got these cool rules, and the adventure is helping me do it, right? And so that was like my big goal design wise going into it. So when people see it, I think we'll enjoy it and get their money's worth from it. Yeah. Oh, I love in the comments here saying I'm about to run Siege of Castle Rend by Scipio 202X. I love that adventure. James Hake wrote it, and the characters in it are just fantastic, really cool, and some neat surprises to the story too. So that was another thing is I was like, all right, I got to base it off of this thing that James Hake wrote, and even though I owned it, I hadn't really read the adventure closely.
Where is this from?
Strongholds and Hirelings.
Yeah, Strongholds and Followers. Yeah,
book. So the first Matthew Colville mega Kickstarter book. And I owned it, and I still own it, but I hadn't closely looked at it. I just flipped through it, and I was like, "Oh, this is cool. I'll read it someday." So then I had to read it because I was writing the sequel, and I'm like, "Wow, this is kind of good. I'm supposed to follow this." James
Hake knows what he's doing. Yeah,
he knows what he's doing. It's really good. I'm like, "Oh, this is really good." I would have been happy if I'd written this.
Yeah.
I hope I did a decent job to it.
Yeah, I'm sure it would be great. If anything, I don't know who's doing. I don't know if we know who's doing the editing, so you have to find out who's behind it. So whoever it is, hopefully they're good and they can clean it up. So Evil John brings up a point when it comes to skill challenges and stuff, which is the need to improvise. The way we've been talking about it, right? We've been doing a lot of talk about how, stay flexible and, go with the flow of the situation and stuff like that. But that does put a pretty high demand on being able to improvise, and that some people, as Evil John says, they vapor lock on improv, right? Like they don't know what to do. What would you, for people that feel like they're not particularly great at that skill, what are some things that people can do to sort of help them be ready to improvise when things are going left in a complicated situation?
So I think that, what it's about thinking about the scene and where the scene can lead to, like what are the prongs of the fork, rather than what fourth edition often did, which was just the outcome of the roll.
Mm-hmm.
It was very role focused, right? And then it would try to tell you things like you fell into a pool of water. And that's sort of dissatisfying when it doesn't feel organic when we weren't talking about the pool of water, right? Mm-hmm. And even if say that icy ground and you've got like some icy pools, just saying like you slip and fall into one, like that's okay, but maybe you want a little more. And so you want to think about what is the point of what's going on here, right? If we're in Candlekeep and it's a skill challenge to find a book, right? Thinking about what happens, like the librarian that gets angry at you and you're disturbing me, you don't know how important I am, or I've got research to do, right? Those kinds of things become fun, mm-hmm. right? Because they're fun situations. And so as you work on to me, the way to work on your improv or your reactions, I don't know if it's even improv, is just the idea of thinking through those situations and trying to breathe life into them, and little by little, game after game, getting better at that, right? To just add color to the scene, knowing sort of what the point of it is, which is, okay, well, if you fail at this check in trying to get help from this librarian, sort of this avenue is closed off and you'll have to go to someone else. And that's going to take longer, right? Maybe that's what your plan is. So your plan can sort of be like that, well, it'll take more steps, mm-hmm. and be more involved, because the head person is she could have given you the info, but you angered her, so she doesn't help you. And so you've got to go another way. Or if it's crossing the wilderness, that maybe you end up setting camp in a really bad place. And you can think through those kinds of situations, right? And so and make them into fun scenes where everybody's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe we're doing this." Like I remember in Tomb of Annihilation, they were going through some watery area, and I had them meet I can't remember the name of the creature. Someone in chat probably will, but those crab folks, mm-hmm. or lobster folks.
I don't remember what they're called, but yeah,
they're like with an A. But so they're very pacifist. Or maybe I think they're pacifist. So I played them that way, and they tried to interact with them and did a quite poor job. And so then everything they did, I just had backfire, right? So they're like, they don't have any weapons, and they're I think the idea was they're being predated upon by the Thans, mm-hmm. is the way I spun it. So they gave them weapons, so they put weapons into the water, and then the weapons go flying out onto the ground, right? Rejected. So whatever it was just rejected. So I just had fun with the idea of your failure. Even though they were trying to, right. They knew as characters what the right stuff was, but they just kept failing at it. And so it's just, It didn't communicate well because of that language barrier. And that was a very fun, enjoyable scene for everybody all around failure. And it was just feeding off of what's going on in the situation, right? Yes.
Yeah. That's something I think, there's an interesting duality that I've come to recognize. Which is sort of like what's right for this situation and the story in the world, and what's fun for the scene, mm-hmm. what's going to be fun to play out. And that there's sometimes you can do both, but a lot of times there's a balance between one and the other, right? And sometimes it's like what would make sense isn't really what's fun. So I'm mm-hmm. going to dial that back a little bit, because fun is more, fun trumps it. So if, when a DM says, "Well, I'm sorry, but that's the way the world would be," is exactly the same as a player saying, "Well, that's the way that's what my character would do," right? So, we have full control over the world. We can do what we want, and we can have things. Maybe the guards aren't alerted, even though you've been banging pots and pans in the kitchen for 2 hours, right? They're all drunk. Who knows? But when you can find that situation of what is happening in the world and what makes sense given what the characters have done and given the situation of the roles and given what's going on, but also what's entertaining about it. Even if it's a failure, what's a fun failure here, right? And you'll pick up the clue, the cues from your players, right? You'll start to see like they think it's funny. I'm going to double down on that, right? It's like, because if they're sitting back with their arms crossed, like, oh, this just sucks. Like, you're not going to keep doing that, right? Yeah. But if somebody's just laughing, or if they say something, I do this all the time where they say something out of character, but it's so funny, and it would be so funny if they had said it in character that you turn it into in-character text, right? Yeah. And I do the same thing with villains all the time, right? Like liches who are talking about their spell slots and stuff like that, And it's just like, the other one's like, just relax, right? Like we're all just having fun around a table. Consistency isn't paramount. Like, go ahead and laugh at yourself and go ahead and, say something of like, no, that's really not what happened. Hang on, this happens instead. Like we're all just playing a game.
And when you're writing, whether it's your home campaign or, and it's part of your, your outline, or if it's for publication, you want to create those kinds of opportunities for those kinds of possibilities, right? And so how can you make it fun that these failures or successes will spin into various things that you can't quite control? And that's okay, because you'll riff off of it, because we know where we're going to go, right? Mm-hmm. In some way, we know the point, we know the goal, we know the objective. And so if something silly or ruinous or surprising happens, we can play around with that and we can create some opportunities, right? And so like folks have really liked in Jungle Treks that I wrote with Eric Mengi, we have this encounter with Grung, the frog dudes, who are they all worship. They have little medallions that has a little emblem, and they're all shouting this thing over and over again. And Grung is just the language Grung, so you probably can't understand them unless you stop to figure it out. But they're all saying "for the pig," and they have these little pig medallions. And what it all can clue you into, it can either be, thanks, Evil John, appreciate it. He's sharing the link. You can either decide that, well, these are really wacky creatures and we're going to stab them to death, but at least it was interesting because they're bizarre, right? And that's fine. Or they might be like, I'm going to stop and cast tongues, and maybe you're going to diplomatize, or maybe you get a little bit of both, like talk some of them down, beat some of them down. We had an interesting mix when I play tested it, but it's that idea of that there's potential here, right? There's that potential energy that can turn into something when the players decide to engage with it, right? And that's what's neat in these scenes. And it feels like you improvised a whole bunch, but the seeds were all there. Right. And so you're just following those threads, you're seeing how it all grows, and it's great, right?
Yeah, I wish there was a couple times where I've been playing like with my Sunday group, and we'll have this sort of like chain reaction riffing on a situation. And like you're screwing the character, but everyone thinks it's hysterical, including the player, right? And they're just in on it. And you just keep doubling down on it. And everyone's just laughing. And it's magic when that happens. Like it's magic when like you didn't expect it to happen. They didn't expect it to happen. Their character's sitting there in the middle of a, half hip deep in a cesspool surrounded by orcs, but everyone's laughing, right? And it's just awesome when that happens.
There's a thing that, I was going to say, Sean Merwin wrote this thing into the Acquisitions Incorporated adventure where you can have a bunch of die hit a character.
Yeah.
And you're dyed green, I think it is, for a month, I think it is. And it's so funny. And this, I when I read it, I was like, okay, that's interesting. But then having the recurring joke where the player would go, wait, am I still green? They're about to talk to someone. Wait, am I still green? I'm like, yeah, I know. You see the person, the merchant's totally staring at you, wondering why your skin's all green.
So Kithri210 brings up a question, which is the tricky bit is that when there's a wide difference between a player's skill at like persuasion or deception and their characters, like, what do you do? And I had this happen where somebody gave a tremendously great speech, like this perfect, eloquent, like the player did it. It's perfect, eloquent speech. And I said, roll a persuasion check. And it was like a 2, right? And what do you, or the opposite, right? Where somebody, the player who's asleep at the table is the one that has a perception of 26, right? So how do you deal with situations where the player proficiency and the character proficiency are different, and particularly an action and a roll are at odds?
So one thing is, if you can, roll first give the
Then-
spiel after, right? And I forget that as a player. I try to remind myself as a player to do that. Roll the dice, then make the speech accordingly,
Mhm.
right? Based on who my character is and what they do. What I tend to do is say something like, you chose the best words possible, but unwittingly insulted your host.
Yeah, right.
Right?
You did
As you're
something,
saying it, and depending on the character, right? Some characters might be picking their nose while they're making this great speech. Others might be, their shirt tail has come out and it's in the guy's wine or something like that,
Yeah.
right? Or something
The
happens.
guy down the block is like, soap with a prize inside, right here, and everyone's like, oh, prize, huh? And they all wander away from your good speech.
Exactly, right? Like somehow it just does not, your flies undone. It can be anything, right?
Right.
And such that it draws away from those good words. And likewise, if you rolled super well, but your plan was terrible, and say completely
luck is on
opposite
your
what
side. Yeah.
work. Yeah, luck is on your side, and somehow, and everybody else, maybe everybody else in the court is going like, I can't believe the king's buying into this, right?
Right.
You can see, and that can be a good way. Like, you can see dissension in the ranks. There is some impact to the fact that what you said is actually a really bad idea, but you said it so well that you convinced the king, and
Right.
or the queen is saying yes, and or that would be great, right? The queen says yes, but the king hates it.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just saying yes to placate her. And some of the high insight characters could pick up on that. And you've got this future tension that might come out as a result of what you did. That could be really interesting, right? So you can roll with it the more that you think about it, and if you're fortunate enough to think about it at the moment.
Yeah, there's a couple of tricks that I've pulled. One is like if they give a really good speech, they just get an automatic advantage on the check, right? So like at least they have two chances to do well rather than one. And then
fair.
the other one is like raising the floor of failure, right? Where like your speech was really good. They're convinced. It's just, are they really going to do what you want? Or are they like, well, I agree with you, but, so the floor of failure goes up so that you can't really fail that bad. Like the speech definitely works. It's just how well does it work?
Yeah, and
those are a couple of approaches I've taken.
I'm totally down with that. Or as Evil John says, just the idea of just saying like, the speech was so good, it's good. My superset of either one wins. But I tend to think that there should be some little impact, right?
Right.
The noble off to the side that has this stern look like they did not like you, right? Just some little implication so that it's sort of like if you're playing Star Wars and you got the complication result, or you had to invoke an aspect, one of those types of mechanics that there's some other, it was at a cost, right?
Right. Yeah.
You succeeded, but that things weren't as smooth as they should have been.
Like your speech was so good, a big crowd came, hey, look, who's that? Is that the assassin who's been hunting you all this time? I think you got his attention too, right? Like,
yeah,
you succeeded. Like they're on it, but like you also got some attention you didn't want, or you really made, you really made the vendor across the street who's trying to sell melons. He's pretty PO'd at you for taking all his customers away. So right, that idea, right? That Z Spell says the 7 to 9 in PBDA, right? Or PBTA, right? The Powered by the Apocalypse. That success with a cost, and I think those are like, there's sort of a set of tools, right? And it's like having giving advantage or disadvantage based on situations is a DM tool. That we can use, knowing what the DC to set is, right, is a tool. The other, and when do you raise or lower the floor, or raise the ceiling, which is also like, right, that DC is always based on character level, right? I just use character level as the DC. So the how do you raise this, lower the ceiling and raise the floor depending on what they did. Which comes to this, like, getting comfortable with success at a cost or failing forward, which is really what skill challenges were trying to do, was hardwire in success with a cost. Like, you're not going to succeed on one check, and failing forward, you're not going to fail on just one check.
Right.
But I don't think those are
a complicated story, right? With steps.
Right. We want a complicated story, and I don't think those are things that you can just put in a clean framework. They're things that take time and effort and energy, and you get better at it with time. And you can't, you can do your best to try to describe them. And luckily we're in an internet world where, I could talk to a smart dude like you and I can learn a whole lot, right? And people can watch live play videos and see how they play out. We can learn a lot about how to get better at this. But it's a learned skill, it's something.
It is a learned skill.
Yeah.
But it is, the funny thing is it's one of those things, like any good, I think, one of the measures of a good tool is that you can often riff on it and do it with very little prep, or you can make it really awesome with a lot of work. And I think skill challenges are sort of like that once you understand what's going on,
you
can improvise a skill challenge, right? Absolutely.
Right.
And even, in fourth edition, sometimes people are like I get this question sometimes. How many failures do we have so far? And they'd look around the table and ask each other. And I'm like, you guys think I'm using those rules? That's really cute.
Like, no.
I never, even when the adventure said X versus Y, I'm not using that. I'm having a good time with you folks. And it's fun that that's its own little metagame. And it's actually quite enjoyable for them to think, are we, I don't know if that was a true failure or not,
right.
So the merchant says to you,
Teos, this has been a fantastic conversation. As always, just love chatting with you at any time. I don't get invited to your show, so I invite you to mine so I can still have this fine interaction.
You will be.
Yay!
The problem is that there are these really cool people that
I know.
like Celeste Conowitz want to be on the show, and so that was going to be your slot.
I asked Celeste to come on this one, and she's like, "No, I'm not going on your show." So I was like, "Well, I'll get Teos. Teos will come on." No, I actually did say sneak preview. I did talk to Celeste, and she's going to be on the deep dive to talk about Venture Maidens. So we're gonna shoot to schedule that next week. Yeah, I'm gonna try to.
Did you see those heroic Destiny type things? Did you?
No, I haven't had a chance to see them yet. But I looked at the campaign overall. It looks awesome.
Everybody should back it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm also we're gonna have a guest, Sean and I, on the Mastering Dungeons podcast that you will be very pleased about once you hear their name. And I'm not gonna.
You're just gonna leave it at that? This big cliffhanger? I'll have to roll a check. So thank you. Thanks. What would you like to pitch? Tell us about where people can find you, what you've got going on, what you want people to do.
You can find me at my blog on alphastream.org. You can join my mailing list that I'm slowly ranking up, trying to be like I'm as cool as Mike Shea.
I have subscribed to that mailing list. It is awesome.
Thank you very much, my friend, because I will be launching this Kickstarter with my son's adventure. It's a really good adventure. I've run it in Spanish and in English already.
Awesome.
It's going to be written, if it funds well, it might even be in Spanish. But I'm really excited about it. It's a lot of fun. It was a huge joy to write with my son and see that come out. So it's super cool.
Do you have a name for us? Or are you hanging on to that?
It's the Clockwork Tower.
The Clockwork Tower. Good name. Cool.
Thanks.
Well, I'm on board.
It's a lot of fun. I've had, the kind of things we're talking about, right? Neat scenes that cause people to do cool things. There's a lot of that in the adventure. So I'm excited to launch that soon. You can find me on Twitter at Alphastream. And then the podcast, Mastering Dungeons.
Mastering Dungeons, fantastic podcast. I
Thank you very much.
Love listening to it. It really, really.
I love everything you do, Mike. And you just have a list of cool people in your chat, which is like really awesome.
Definitely. Yeah. Thanks to all the people that have hung out today in the Twitch chat and came up with really good questions. And thanks to all of you watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast or wherever else you're getting this show. Always appreciate your support. And thank you very much. And we will see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.